what is trauma and have I experienced it? Also thinking about like how do I know I've experienced trauma? Um, this can be a controversial topic amongst psychologists, psychiatrists, uh, people in the traditional field, and then people in more of the holistic psychotherapeutic field can think of trauma in different ways. So, my take on it is more in the holistic psychotherapeutic field, and you'll sort of understand that more and more as we cover the topic. And just throughout today, for over the hour, if we go for that long, yeah, pop your questions in the chat if you have any. So, what is trauma? Now, this example here is Peter Levine and his work that he's done. Peter Levine created the modality somatic experiencing, and he believes trauma to be not the actual event, but what happens to us in the event. So, what happens to our autonomic nervous system and also the part of our nervous system that's involuntary. So, that is our fight flight response as well. So, it's anything that we don't mean, like, we don't mean to do pretty much, and we can do it automatically. So, he believes, and so does Gabor Mate, is also someone that believes similar work to this. He says it's not what happens to us, it's what happens inside of us. And this is because we all respond to trauma differently. So one person could be in the same experience as another person and not suffer from a traumatic experience. They may not feel like it was traumatizing to them. So this is all dependent on our genetic makeup, early environmental challenges, specific trauma, and attachment. So our relationships growing up. It varies with all of us. It's our environment, everything that we learn when we're young, socially, all these things have a different impact on us as individuals. So there's lots of writing here. You don't have to worry too much about this. But there are different types of trauma. So in the traditional sense, you'll see there's 3 types of trauma. So there's your acute trauma, which is a single incident. So that's like a car accident or a single experience. Obviously, that's traumatic. And then there's your chronic and complex trauma. I'm not going to go into depth in the traditional sort of sense, because those are things that you can always like Google and look up. I'm going to talk about trauma more from a psychotherapeutic perspective of what is a traumatic experience growing up. And I do this because often, and I work at a mental health retreat, so often I was told at this retreat by people, I had a really good upbringing, or I cannot really remember my upbringing. And that means to me, if I can't remember my upbringing, there's some sort of negative experiences growing up that has been pushed down, suppressed, or repressed. So suppressed is when we might kind of see it come up through feelings, visuals, but we just push it back down by coping mechanisms. And repressed is more where we just don't know it's there. We don't know it's there until we might get a flashback, a memory, a feeling in the body, and it's really unexpected. It's kind of like, oh, I didn't even realize that was there. I didn't even know that happened to me because it's been repressed. So what I then look at is what are examples then of a traumatic experiences growing up, and it's things like being criticized, and it's not just once or twice, but it's generally criticized from a caregiver or someone that you're close to often, and you're getting criticized often growing up, with when you're exploring, when you are trying new skills, sports, maybe you didn't get an A, you got a B instead of an A, things like that, where it's like really high standards. There's also bullying as well in that, so maybe by your siblings or your parents. These are traumatic experiences for us growing up. It creates belief systems from these experiences. So we internalize it and we create belief systems like I'm not good enough. So if I'm bullied, I might be like I'm weak, I feel powerless around other people. We create all these belief systems underneath it. Fear-based parenting also is traumatic. Neglect, physical or emotional. Chaotic home life where parents fight often, or there's physical abuse. Loud home that lacks peace, calmness, and play. Parents with addiction. So that's the list. There's a few more there. Strict religious upbringing, to be seen, not heard, toughen up. That sort of parenting of, suck it up, boys don't cry kind of thing. And your more obvious ones is like physical abuse, sexual abuse, and your less obvious ones are emotional abuse growing up. So this is neglect your needs and emotional needs. So you may be crying, you get pushed aside, dismissed, neglected in the way of like maybe you get isolated. So things like that really create a traumatic experience for us because we don't get supported to regulate our nervous system. And I'll go into the nervous system next so you can understand where this is all coming from. So those are some examples. So narcissistic parents generally lack empathy. And if they lack empathy, then you pushed away, dismissed a lot as a child. And also it's all about them and less about you and your needs. Parents that work a lot is actually a really common one for people, where they believe they've given everything to their kids and they've worked really, really hard for it. And what has happened is they haven't been there to spend time, nurture and love and care with their kids and encourage their kids' needs and strengths and all that sort of thing, because they have just not been there for them emotionally. So that can create a disconnect. So here we've got the circle of security, and this is taught to parents, new parents that have kids, and are taught how to have secure relationships with their kids. The reason why I bring this in around have I experienced trauma, if you have not got a secure relationship with your caregivers and you in yourself have an insecure relationship, so these are your attachment styles, so attachment theory, there's 4 main ones. So you've got your secure, your anxious attachment, your dismissive avoidant, and your fearful avoidant. So that's something that we'll look into further in future videos. But we as kids need a safe place, a safe, secure place to explore from, to learn from. And often if we've had some trauma around our learning, maybe sports or education, we've either been shamed during these times or discouraged, criticized, judged, and very little nurturing in this space where we needed encouragement and support. So that is at the top. You can see what we actually need is to explore with support, watch over me, delight in me, help me, and enjoy with me. Many parents are busy working, or maybe they've got their own challenges and stresses. So they just, if they haven't met this need 30 to 50% of the time, then that will create an insecurity within us, and it creates an anxiety because generally the parenting is either neglectful or it's overbearing, controlling, and not giving you the experience that you need to be able to learn from a place of regulation. So then you come back to your parents when you were young, for comfort with your emotions. This is when we're crying, when we have needs that we want to have met. Maybe we've been hurt by someone else, so we feel upset in some way, we feel sad, maybe we feel angry. Whatever emotion comes up, we come back to our caregivers. A safe haven is when they protect us, comfort us, delight in us, and organize our feelings. This is not the case all the time because many people are brought up to dismiss their emotions, which causes us to avoid, suppress, and repress negative experiences. This is things like suck it up, boys don't cry, don't be dramatic for women is a common one. Um, Other things like it wasn't that bad, you're not even hurt, there's no physical injury. So, really minimizing the emotional pain that is traumatic, because what it actually does is it teaches us to not show emotion and suppress it. So it conditions us to suppress it to a point where we start to learn that if we were to express emotions, it will be a negative consequence. So we start doing that to ourselves. We dismiss, minimize, and push it away as a coping mechanism. And what we say is, what what's the saying? What we resist persists. So that's a real common one in that space, where we may think it works and we become resilient, but it will catch up. It will leak out in some way, whether it's health conditions, whether it's broken relationships, whether it's career breakdowns, whatever it is. If we don't work with and comfort ourselves in our emotions, and create a safe space for it, we will find that there will be generally consequences to it, because repression and suppression is a coping mechanism. So that there is secure and safe haven that we do need. If you didn't have that growing up, you more than likely have some sort of trauma around your relationships growing up, and your exploration and the way you learn. So you might be really anxious when you learn new skills, or you could be also um, really find it hard to sort of be with people when they're emotional. So things like that. Okay, moving on to polyvagal theory. So going back to Peter Levine's definition of trauma, and how he talks about it being an autonomic response in the system. Peter Levine's work is all around completing a process. So trauma is something when it's a negative experience that's unresolved in our system, in our nervous system, in our body. We don't have that resolve. So what happens is we cycle in a flight response, or a shutdown, as you can see here. Why do we cycle in that? It's because we get stuck in it. Trauma causes us to get stuck in stress responses longer than what is needed. A stress response is there for a reason, and trauma causes us to get stuck in it because we create belief systems around that stress that reinforces us to stay in that stress. And I'll explain a bit more of that going on. But we have three areas of our nervous system. So one's rest and digest. This is where we're social, safe, we're curious, open to learning, we are connected, creative. It's where we all want to be. It's our happy place. It feels light. It feels good in that space. Then what happens is we get something comes in. So this could be an example of this could be a work colleague comes in and gives you negative feedback. That could elicit a fight or flight response. Seeing a snake can elicit a fight or flight response. Running from a brown snake can elicit that response. I had one recently where it was someone was fearful of bulls, and I feel like that's a pretty fair enough fear to have against bulls. So the fight flight response is there for a reason. It's there to protect us, and it helps us look for cues of safety and danger. What happens with trauma is we are hyper vigilant to cues of danger. And so what we want to do is, when coming out of trauma, is teach ourselves how to look for more cues of safety and how to create more cues of safety within ourselves. Then if we've been fighting and running, let's say we're running from a bull, we become so exhausted, it's not working, then we shut down. This is also the equivalent to this is workaholism. We work from morning till night, say we do overtime, we get asked to work and we don't say no, even though we're exhausted. And then we go into burnout. So that's what shutdown is, and the freeze and fawn response. So we are then just trying to survive. It's actually the most survival point in, like, primitively. So like as a biological being, shutdown is at the lowest point of our survival. Um, so what we want to do is we want to be higher up from there. We shut down, we can get stuck in that as well. So looking at this on a ladder, and the reason why it's on a ladder is because we move down the ladder. So as you can see, up the top is our ventral vagal. So the vagus nerve is what keeps us calm, relaxed, social. Like I said before, we've got caring, generous there in that space as well. And when we're in the fight flight response, that becomes offline, and we can get into more anger, panic, rage, depending on where we are. It can be more subtle, where it's frustration. And that's where fear comes in. We're agitated, and we also blame out. So in this, you will know in your everyday life, if you are someone who is often angry at other people or can snap really easily, you find that you get stressed really quickly, and you're often yelling at other people, you are in this fight flight response. This is the area of being highly stressed and anxious. And then what happens is, if we are in this space and it doesn't work, so we're in this panic, we're worrying, everything we do is not working, then we go into the shutdown. So this is why it's on a ladder, because fight flight happens first and then shut down. This can be really obvious, where you're like fight flight, and then you notice yourself going into a bit more of a depressive state. And it could also be really subtle, where the fight flight is very quick and you go into shutdown, where you don't even notice that you've been in fight flight. But it's always going from one to the next, so it doesn't actually skip down the ladder. And at the bottom, we've got the lowest point that we can be at. This is where depression is, dissociation, shame lives here, helplessness. It's a heavy feeling. We can feel really heavy in this space. What trauma does is it keeps us stuck in this cycle of fight, flight, and shut down. And it's on the ladder because once I'm shut down, I might use a coping mechanism to get me back up to fight, flight, but it doesn't necessarily get me up to rest and digest. So let's say if I am a workaholic and I find myself, I can't stop working. I have to keep going, because if I stop, I start to feel really uncomfortable in my body, and I start to feel really a bit depressed because I have nothing to do or look forward to. So what I might do is create jobs for myself. So that gets me back into fight flight. So I'm feeling more, but I'm not necessarily nourishing myself. I'm more in a sympathetic activation, which is stress on the body. It's not necessarily it's not a healthy way to be for the long term. So in the short term, it's good. It's a good signal for stress. In the long term, that's when it can cause more health conditions. The other examples of this is we can be in fight flight and feel the discomfort of that, and then use alcohol to numb that discomfort, which then it makes us feel good for a really short period of time, but it actually drops us down into shutdown afterwards when we're coming off the alcohol. And then we go, if we start to drink again, then we're back up to a fight flight response. Often people drink for excitement as well, and they may get a hit of excitement while drinking, and then there's the shutdown as well. So we've got that. So I brought into, like, when we're with the ladder, just more examples around, and I've already spoken about this, but when we're at the top, we're more able to socialize. So if you've got social anxiety or something like that, you're more in fight flight when you're out in social places. And this is why a lot of people drink, is so that they can actually become more social and feel more comfortable in social situations. This is why it can be hard to socialize if you've already got anxiety, because you're already in this fight flight response. if you have these symptoms and life is difficult if you're feeling really anxious or if you're feeling depressed down there, and it's a common feeling that you have, you more than likely have experienced some sort of trauma to be stuck in those places. What happens is our thinking then reinforces this also. So in fight flight, we get into a bit of a fix it mode. This is where our worry and our thinking and our fix it mode comes in. And so we stay in fight flight because when we're anxious, what we actually need to do is breathe and ground ourselves and do something that doesn't feel so unease. It's to soothe ourselves in this space. And often we do the opposite because we weren't taught that growing up. So this is where emotional neglect comes in. If I don't know how to soothe myself, I was more than likely neglected as a child, in the sense of my caregivers didn't know how to help soothe me and teach me tools and skills to soothe my nervous system, to soothe me when I was in an anxious state. So I learned from them how to soothe. A lot of people use wine to soothe. They use, shopping, work, whatever it is that is used. So I've got here addiction, keeping busy, judging others, and also ADHD can be here as well. Anxiety. That's the main ones, but there's probably more there too. Then we've got a shutdown response here. This is where we people please and self-abandon. Now, if you've had trauma around boundaries, this is what it means. Self-abandonment means that I am neglecting my own needs, how I feel, to make sure that you're okay. I'm going to minimize the conflict or reduce any discomfort that someone else is feeling to make sure everything's okay with a group of people or with one-on-one. And in order to do that, I have to put my own self aside to make sure that they're okay. So generally, self-abandonment is someone that gives to other people before they give to themselves. This is a common trauma response to an upbringing of being conditioned to do things for others and to also be the parent in a relationship too. I can be parentified, and that means that I had to put myself aside to take care of my siblings or even my parent as well. So self-abandonment is a common ones around, I don't know what my boundaries are or what my needs are because I had to take care of everyone else when I was young. As adults, we do it as a default without even realizing we're doing it. And it's not until later on, after an interaction or after saying yes when you mean no, that you'll feel a sense of resentment, frustration, and it's like this yucky, heavy feeling that you can feel. And that's how you know that you've self-abandoned. Procrastination lives in shutdown as well. If you're someone that's really wanting to achieve goals, whether it's weight loss goals, business goals, career goals, relationship goals, and you are finding that you cannot move forward with them, this is where procrastination lives. And this is also where internalized inner critic can live too. There's a protector coming in, trying to protect you from growing or from doing the thing that you're trying to do. And it wants to be seen and heard. Generally, if we are constantly procrastinating, again, there's some sort of traumatic experience with our learning something new or trying something new when we're doing something that's uncomfortable, out of our comfort zone. So negative self-talk lives down here, blaming ourselves. We're often very critical of self when we're shut down and in fawn. When we're in fight flight, we're often critical of others. When we're in shutdown and freeze and fawn, we're critical of ourselves. So this is just an overview of your autonomic nervous system and what Peter Levine is talking about when he talks about that traumas in the nervous system. And this is what that is. Any questions thus far? No questions. Okay. So again, I've gone through this already. How do I know I have unprocessed trauma? I know because I have addictions. If I've got coping mechanisms, addictions, if I burn out, if I'm someone that doesn't have boundaries and I say yes, yes, yes to everything and then end up burning out, if I identify as a workaholic, if because workaholism is also an addiction. If I feel tired and stressed often, this is like where it's my identity. It's like I often feel tired and stressed. I'm stuck in that cycle of fight, flight, and burnout or shutdown. I struggle with anxiety and depression to a point where I'm on medication. So what I mean by this is if I am struggling with depression and anxiety and I can't function, so I'm taking medication to stabilize me, then there's a good reason, there's an underlying symptom underneath that as to why you might be having depression or anxiety in the first place. And it's getting to know that part of you. Medication is really good to stabilize us, and then doing more of the inner work. What the inner work means is going underneath the symptom or signal, and the symptom and signal is anxiety and depression. So going underneath what that is. I struggle to have healthy relationships. So often that's where the circle of security comes in. If we've grown up with insecure caregivers and parents and they have not been there for us, we will also internalize that as well and create insecure relationships growing up as well. And we will either be fearful of abandonment to the point where we create an abandonment situation where we feel abandoned and the person leaves us, or we leave them before it gets too serious. So these dynamics can change. I'll go into that in another video. That's more attachment theory. If you're diagnosed with ADHD, this is something that Gabor Mate talks about a lot as well, is the connection to trauma around this. It might not be every time, but most likely there's some sort of trauma around there. Often we can also relate to ADHD where we're like, I can't sit still, I can't focus, I feel really bored or uncomfortable when I am still. Is a really good indicator that there's stuff going on in your nervous system, as I showed on the ladder, and you are becoming dysregulated, because when we are silent or slow down, our body is signaling to us that there's something not right and it wants us to listen. But when we work and when we use coping mechanisms, we're numbing out that signal that the body's giving us. So when we go quiet, if we're someone that always has to be on the go, then we will find that the discomfort will come up and it's trying to say, hey, there's something here that I want you to see. That's why therapy helps you slow it down. Okay, quarter life crisis, midlife crisis. Who am I? This is something I went through myself, and when I started studying, if we're going through quarter life or midlife crisis, there's a really good indicator that our individuation didn't happen at the point that it was meant to, which means around 2, when we start becoming terrible 2s, it talks about how we are starting to individuate what we want and need. And also then we go into more the teens, where we're starting to get to know who we are and what our personality is. So there's that rebellious kind of energy that we can have. If we don't go through that and we're not encouraged with what we like, what our needs are, what our strengths are, and what we want, and rather than what our parents want, then we will find that when we're older, we'll have a crisis point, because it will come up again where it's like, I don't even like what I'm doing, or what I'm doing doesn't nourish me, or I don't feel passionate about it. It's more than likely because you're doing something that you thought would bring you happiness, and you weren't sort of taught how to create a career, relationships from your own inner world. So what your needs are, what your values are. We're not really taught that at school. So then we are rediscovering who we are. So that is a really good indicator that growing up you weren't encouraged in that space. Struggle with weight gain or the okay, there's spelling mistake. There's probably a few spelling mistakes throughout. Um, I'm not sure what's happened there, but body dysmorphia as well. Often weight loss, weight gain. That can also be some form of there's trauma. There's some trauma there if that's something that we struggle with. Whether it's wanting control over something because when we were younger we couldn't have that control, or whether it's our caregivers and our parents' mother being very critical about image. Whatever it is, there is some trauma there if we've got weight gain or severe weight loss. And just finding it difficult to say no to people. This is bigger than what it seems. And then I've got underneath that boundaries. What are they? These are things that we don't tend to think much of because we live in a society where yes is really encouraged, being selfless is encouraged, and also not putting other people before you is encouraged. So we don't tend to think that this is a problem. But the problem with this, and Gabor Mate speaks about this a lot, is there's a high percentage, I think it is for women, autoimmune disease. There's a really high percentage in women because of the self abandonment and doing things for everyone else, but not self. So what happens is it seems like it's really positive to do that, but when we're actually abandoning our own needs, which means that it will come out in illness or relationship breakdown. So you might be in a 20-year relationship and then you turn around and become quite resentful and angry towards your husband, or your husband, vice versa, female male. But this is what happens. We have breakdowns because we can't sustain saying yes all the time. We have to really meet our needs. So there will be a crisis point that's hit. So this is some of the how do we know we've got unprocessed trauma. These are some examples of it. So that is about it around what is trauma and how do I know that I've experienced it. Any questions or comments?
Well, that was fun.